Leviticus chapter 16. And from the congregation of the children of Israel, from verses 5, it says, and from the congregation of the children of Israel, he takes 2 male goats as a sin offering and 1 ram as an ascending offering. And Aaron shall bring the bull as a sin offering, which is for him, and make atonement for himself and for his house. And he shall take the 2 goats and let them stand before Yahuwah at the door of the tent of appointment. And Aaron shall cast lots for the 2 goats, 1 lot for Yahuwah and the other lot for Azazel. And Aaron shall bring the goat on which the lot for whom Yahuwah fell, and shall prepare it as a sin offering. But the goat on which the lot for Azazel fell is caused to stand alive before Yahuwah, to make atonement upon it, and to send it into the wilderness to Azazel. So it's interesting because, they're talking about bringing and from the congregation of the children of Israel, you take 2 male goats as a sin offering and 1 ram as an ascending offering. So the goat was to be the sin offering and the ram was to be the ascending offering. So Yahushua was going to become that ascending offering and the bull as the sin offering. So that was the ascending offering, and then this goat is the one that's got to go out, which is where the sins are. And it's interesting because we find out Barabbas is the one that is a sinner, a serious evil man, a sinner. And so the innocent one, they are going to be able to offer as an ascending offering to the Father, and that is Yahushua. And the Barabbas is the one that they let free. But this is according to their habit, because he says, but you have a habit in John chapter 18 verses 39, but you have a habit that I shall release someone to you at the Passover, at the Pesach. Do you wish then that I release to you the sovereign of the Jews, the king of the Jews? Then they all shouted again, saying, not this one, but Barabbas. Barabbas was a robber. So Yah was a robber. He was a serious sinner, and that was the one that they were going to release to go free. So now we go look at John chapter 19. So from this, Pilate took Yahushua and flogged him, and the soldiers played that crown, okay, they put it on his head, and so it carries on. And then in verse 14 it says, and it was the preparation day of the Pesach. Now they've added in our Bibles week. It's not the Pesach week, it's the Pesach. And it was because I've gone and looked at the original scripture, and the original scripture doesn't say weeks. As you can see, that week has been sort of like, it's in a different writing. And it was the preparation day of the Pesach. And about the 6th hour, and he said to the Yodim, see your sovereign. So the 6th hour is now apparently, which is what they say, 12 o'clock, which they say that Yahushua was crucified at 12 o'clock. So, and so he was impaled. They took Yahushua and led him away, and bearing his stake, he was out to the so-called place of the skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha. So at the 12th hour he was led out, and that's when he would have been crucified, was at the 6th hour, which was 12 o'clock the afternoon. And Pilate wrote the title, okay, above him that says, Yahushua of Nazareth, the sovereign, the king of the Yehudim. The sovereign of the Yehudim is the king of the Yehudim. So now, let's go and read a little bit further. Then Yahushua, seeing his mother. Okay, let's look from verse 28, chapter 19, verse 28. And this Yahushua, knowing that all had been accomplished in order that the scripture might be accomplished, said, I thirst. And the bowl of sour wine stood there, and they filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on hyssop, and held it to his mouth. So the blood was put on hyssop on the lintels of the doors. They take the sour wine, which is like the grape juice, the sour grape juice, which represents the blood, which is the sour grape juice, not wine of fermented wine, sour grape juice. Okay, and put it on hyssop, okay, which would have been put on the lintels of the door, and held it to his mouth. So this is exactly how they take the hyssop. Remember, they had to dip the blood with the hyssop and put it on the lintels of the door. As they slaughtered the lamb, they had to do this. And then they would then have the Passover meal that night. Remember, everything needs to fulfill 100%. And so when Yahushua took the sour wine, he said, "It has been accomplished." And bowing his head, he gave up his spirit. Therefore, now listen, verse 31. Therefore, since it was the preparation day, they've just said the Passover before, now they change it to preparation day again. Why preparation day? Why not the Sabbath of unleavened bread or Passover? No. Therefore, it was the preparation day, that the body should not remain on the stake on the Sabbath. So you see, if they were to put their unleavened bread or the Feast of Passover, then we know that it's the Sabbath coming in, and then that wouldn't line up with the Sabbath of a Friday. So it was the Sabbath. But interesting, because in our Bible it says the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high one. So this is the high holy Sabbath of the unleavened bread, of when they're going to sit down and have their Passover meal. So the Yehudim asked Pilate to have their legs broken and that they be taken away. Therefore the soldiers came to break the legs of the first and of the other who was impaled with him. Now remember what was said? They were not to break not one bone of the lamb that was going to be slaughtered, the lamb that was offered. Now it says, but when they came to Yahushua and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. So there was no bone broken. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and instantly blood and water came out. And he who has seen has witnessed, and his witness is true. And he knows that he is speaking the truth in order that you might believe. So now let's look a little bit further. And it says, then they took the body of Yahushua and bound it in linen wrapping. We looked at verse 40. Now look further at John 19, verse 40. Then they took the body of Yahushua and bound it in linen wrappings with spices, as was the habit of the Yehudim for burial. And at the place where he was impaled, there was a garden. And in the garden a fresh tomb, in which no one had yet been laid. There then, because of the preparation day, because of the feast day, the feast of what? The feast of Passover, together with the unleavened bread of the Yehudim, of the Jews. Again, it's the feast of the Jews. They laid Yahushua because the tomb was near. So again, it's the feast of the Jews, not the feast of the Father. And now you see where they say preparation day, because they don't want it to say, because they've already put Sabbath, so that the Sabbath would be the Friday, so that we have a Friday when we keep this Friday that we keep. He died on a Friday, resurrected on a Sunday. And that's why we're going to have Mary coming to the tomb on a Sunday morning, because then he resurrected on a Sunday. But now we're going to continue to see the fulfillment of this. And now we're going to read in John chapter 20, because now we're going to continue to see John chapter 20. Oh, before we get there, because now when we get to John chapter 20, we're going to deal with first fruits. So we've dealt with the Passover, we've dealt with unleavened bread. Now let's go to Leviticus chapter 23. Because now we need to deal with first fruits. Because by now, Yahushua has been put in the grave. He's now there. And now we're going to look carefully. I know that people, this is in depth. But we need to make it in depth for us to be able to look at all the discrepancies in our Bible, and so that we can once and for all stop the confusion that we have had, because there's a lot of confusion amongst Messianic believers that keep these feasts differently, and that is why now we need to be able to do this properly. So, Leviticus chapter 23, from verse 10 it says, so from verse 9, and Yahuwah spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel, and you shall say to them, when you come into the land which I give you, and shall reap its harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf of first fruits of your harvest to the priest. So what happens is, in the time of springtime, they come into the land. Now that's when they will come and they will put their barley. They put their barley out. This is why everybody wants to run around and check for barley. They put their barley out, and then they will bring the sheaf, which is the first fruits, which is when the barley is Aviv. Now, that's why I'm saying it's the month of Aviv, so it's on the 14th day of the month of Aviv, which is the month of where the Jewish calendar is the month of Nisan. The first day of the month of Aviv is when we start the feasts, when we start the new year. Then on the 10th day the lamb is chosen. Then on the 14th day of the month of Aviv, we read that already in Exodus chapter 12. Now that word Aviv also means spring. So it's in the month of the springtime. So you cannot be having a barley being Aviv in a time of where it's before the equinox, because before the equinox it's not springtime. So that's why everything has to line up. So it's the springtime, but it's also the first fruits, which is that which is ripe. It's ready. It's ripe. It's Aviv. The barley is Aviv. It's ripe. It's ready. And now we take the first fruits, because this is the first fruits harvest. The very, very first few that are going to be ripe. We bring the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. And he shall wave the sheaf before Yahuwah for your acceptance. On the morrow after the Sabbath, the priest waves it. So, on the morrow after the Sabbath, which Sabbath? So in this case, it's the morrow after the Sabbath, not the high holy Sabbath, because you're going to see clearly that after this, you have to keep 7 Sabbaths to keep the Feast of Shavuot, and therefore it's got to be the morrow after the Sabbath, the Sabbath of the weekly Sabbath. You now bring that sheaf to offer it to the Father, because that is when Yahushua resurrected, the morrow after the Sabbath. So straight as the Sabbath finished, that Sabbath was the 3rd day. Straight after the Sabbath finished, he resurrected. As it came into the time of when the sun was going down, exactly when the day is finishing, Yahushua resurrected. So the morning after the Sabbath, the morrow after the Sabbath, the priest waves it. And on the day when the wave of the sheaf, you shall prepare a male lamb, a year old, a perfect one, as an ascending offering to Yahuwah. Now remember, what was the one? The lamb was to be the ascending offering, and the goat was the one that was going to be set free. So first he becomes the Passover lamb, that is going to fulfill the Passover lamb, that he becomes the Passover lamb, and then he's going to become the ascending offering, which is where it's spoken of. Remember, we read in Leviticus chapter 16 that it talks about the lamb, a perfect lamb that becomes the ascending offering, and then there is 2 goats, and the goat is going to go out, and that's why Barabbas goes out, because he's the goat that goes out, and Yahushua becomes the first fruits ascending offering, that he's going to become the lamb that's going to become the ascending offering of the first fruits to the Father. And so it says the ascending offering to Yahuwah. So here we see he's to become the ascending offering and the first fruits. So there's another feast that we keep, which is the Feast of First Fruits, which is when Yahushua becomes the first fruits offering. So now the high priest comes and he waves the wave offering. So Yahushua had to become the wave offering, that the priest is going to offer the wave offering. He becomes the first fruits of that wave offering, and he becomes the lamb of the ascending offering, because he was the lamb that they chose to be able to give as the ascending offering, because the goat went free. Barabbas went free, and Yahushua was the one that was going to be crucified. So now we're going to look at John chapter 20 for us to see how this was fulfilled. So let's look at John chapter 20. so that we can see again a confusion in our Bible, because I'm not even going to go there with the other scriptures in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. I'm going to stay with John, because John is the one that gets it right. So in John chapter 20, from verse 1, it says, and on day 1 of the week, Miriam, so when does day 1 of the week start? As we come to the end of the Sabbath. And on day 1 of the week, Miriam from Magdala came early to the tomb while it was still dark. Okay, so if we take that word still, that word is G2089, which is eti, and that is after dark. So, while it was after dark, when it started to get dark, after dark, when it started to get dark, and saw that the stone had been removed from the tomb. So, on day 1 of the week, when is day 1 of the week? Day 1 of the week is exactly as it's, because I think, let me just quickly see. I think it's in Matthew. It's in Matthew. Let's go read Matthew. Matthew says it also. Let's go look and see Matthew chapter 28. Look, see. But late in the Sabbath. So late in the Sabbath. Okay, so when's late in the Sabbath? So just keep your hand there by John chapter 20. Late in the Sabbath, as it was dawning into day. Now, could it be dawning into day? So they put dawning. Could it be dusking into day? As it's starting to come into day, the new day. So late in the Sabbath. When is late in the Sabbath? Late in the Sabbath is when you're coming to the end of the Sabbath. When it's coming to the new day. As it was dawning. So that word dawning doesn't make sense at all about being there. Have they instilled that word so that we could have a resurrection on a Sunday morning? Day 1 of the week, Miriam from Magdala and the others came to see the tomb. So you see, as late in the Sabbath. So when is the Sabbath? The Sabbath is the end of the Saturday. So late at the end of the Saturday, when Miriam was going to come to the tomb, Miriam and the other Miriam was coming to the tomb late after the Sabbath. So when it was getting dark. So that's here where it says over here. And on day 1 of the week, which is day 1 of the week starts right at day 1 of the week starts at night time. Mary from Magdala came early to the tomb while it was after dark. So when it was after dark, because remember, if they change one word, they change everything. So they got it to put while it was still dark. They have to put while it was still dark. So if you take away that still, while it was dark, or when it was dark, and saw that the tomb had been removed from the tomb, when the stone had been removed from the tomb. So now if we look and see, let's move forward and go to verse 12. And saw 2 messengers in white sitting, one at the head and the other at the feet, where the body of Yahushua had been laid. And they said to her, Woman, why are you weeping? She said to them, Because they have took away my master, and I do not know where they laid him. And having said this, she turned around and saw Yahushua standing, but she did not know that it was Yahushua. Yahushua said to her, Woman, why do you weep? Whom do you seek? Thinking he was the gardener. She said to him, Master, if you have carried him away, say to me where you put him, and I take him away. Yahushua said to her, Miriam. She turned and said to him, Rabboni, which means teacher. Yahushua said to her, Do not hold on to me. So you see, he's just resurrected. As we've come into the end of the Shabbat, and they've just entered into the tomb as it's getting dark. While it had started to get dark. We need to understand these things properly. And my father, and he says, Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father, but go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, and to my Yahushua and your alua. So he needed to take the blood, to bring the blood of the ascending offering of him becoming the first fruits offering. Miriam from Magdala came announcing to the taught ones that she had seen the master and that he had told them. When therefore it was evening on that first day of the week, so it was evening, and now it's the first day of the week, which means it's now that night. And when the first day of the week, and when the taught ones were shut, where the taught ones met, the fear of Yahuwah, Alua, came and stood in the midst and said to them, peace to you. So you see, so he resurrects at the close of the Shabbat. He becomes the ascending offering of the first fruits offering, which is the wave offering. And he becomes the ascending offering of the lamb that needs to become the ascending offering, because he was the lamb that they chose to be retained, to be slaughtered for the Passover and for the ascending offering, because they let the goat, which was the robber, Barabbas, to go free. Barabbas to go free. So that's why now we see the powerful feast that this is. Because why? We're going to have a Passover meal on the 8th, and then on the 8th of April 2020, that evening, as we're going to enter that evening of that day, and now we're going to have then the Feast of Unleven Bread starting, and the Passover on the 8th, and then on the 11th, which was the third day. And remember, he's got to be in the grave 3 nights. So he's in the grave the night of the 8th, the night of the 9th, the night of the 10th, and then the 11th. At the close of the Shabbat is the third day. Before the evening ends, he resurrects. Before we start as we get to the close of the day. So it's 3 full days, 3 nights that he's in the belly of the earth. And like Jonah, in the belly of the whale 3 days and 3 nights, and at the close of the Shabbat on the 11th, that is when the resurrection takes place, exactly when the priest is offering on the morrow after the Sabbath. So the morrow after the Sabbath starts that night. So that night, the wave offering is taking place, and the ascending offering of the lamb is taking place, and then from that day we start counting for the feast of Shavuot, and then we count 50 days leading from that night of the Saturday night with the day of the 12th. From the day of the 12th, we will count 50 days leading up to the day of Shavuot, which will be on the 30th. It should be then on the 30th of August is when we should be keeping it then. So, which will be from the 29th to the 30th, which is when we should be keeping that feast then, the next feast. So now we are going to see, as we're wrapping up this whole this whole teaching, we are going to be able to look and see that Yahushua fulfilled first fruits, Yahushua fulfilled the Feast of Passover. But is there scripture in this Bible that speaks about a first fruits offering? Because we need to understand what is first fruits about. Because understanding Yahushua resurrecting is part of the fulfilling of a feast of first fruits. So Yahushua became the first fruits that was resurrected from the dead. And does they speak about the Bible, about this feast of first fruits? So let's go look at 1 Corinthians chapter 15. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 from verses 20 to 23, and it says, "But now Messiah has been raised from the dead and has become the first fruits of those having fallen asleep." So Yahushua becomes the first fruits of those that have fallen asleep. "For since death is through a man, resurrection of the dead is also through a man. For all die in Adam, and so also all shall be made alive in Messiah. And each in his own order, Messiah first fruits, Messiah, the first fruits, then those who are of Messiah at his coming. So you see, we will become at his coming, not a hidden thing, not a thing that, we're not even going to go there with this rapture because people believe at his coming. There's only a second coming when all eyes will see him. That is spoken of in Matthew chapter 24. All eyes will see him coming. There's not a little secret thing. All eyes is going to see Yahushua coming in the clouds. Matthew chapter 24. All eyes will see him. And then he comes and gathers his first fruits. Not any time before. Because when Messiah at his coming, so when Messiah comes, so there's no secret thing that's going to happen. It's at Messiah's coming that this of is to happen. Because we seem to have, you see, when we understand the feast, then we understand everything has to take place in its appointed time. And that's why in Matthew chapter 24, he says, let no one deceive you. Let no one deceive you. He says, Matthew chapter 24, I'm just going to quickly go there. And it says, and as it was in the days of Noah also, the coming of the son of Adam to be. For as they were in the days before the flood, eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and they did not know until the flood came and took them all away, so also the coming of the son of Adam be. Then two shall be in the field, one will be taken and the other will stay behind. And because at the coming of the Son of Man, it's at the coming of the Son of Man, all eyes is going to see him. And that is what we need to understand. So let's go and read now James 1 verse 8, because we're going to do this section of, this is the first fruits. James 1 verse 8, James 1 verse 8. Sorry, James 1 verse 18. It's James 1 verse 18, not James 1 verse 8. James 1 verse 18. And it says, having purposed it, he brought us forth by the word of truth for us to be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. So when he comes, he's going to redeem from the earth his first fruits of his creatures. So he will have first fruits. As he became the first fruits offering, so there he too is going to have first fruits offering. So then we're going to look at Revelation 14 verse 4. Who are these first fruits? And he says, and they are those who are not defiled with woman, for they are maidens. They are those following the Lamb wherever he leads them. They were redeemed from among men, being first fruits to Yahushua and to the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no falsehood. So please, people, why are we having to expose all the false things in our Bible? Because in their mouths was found no falsehood, for they are blameless before the throne of Yahushua. So that is why we have to expose every single lie, because we cannot have lies upon our lips. Then we're going to see, was this already happening? Did any of the other disciples, does it get kept by the disciples? Let's look at Acts chapter 20, because then they'll say, oh no, but you know what? It wasn't really kept in the New Testament, they didn't really keep it. So let's look at Acts chapter 20. And this is the famous Paul, Shaul, where everybody always wants to throw me Paul and say, yes, but Paul, he says this. Okay, let's look at Paul in Acts chapter 20, verse 6, and says, and he sailed, who's this he? And we sailed from Philippi. This is Paul speaking. And we sailed from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and came to them at Troas in 5 days, where we stayed 7 days. So they already sailed after the days of unleavened bread. So they kept the days of unleavened bread, sailed after that. But if you want to turn around and say, yeah, but that still doesn't prove it, no problem. We go to 1 Corinthians chapter 5. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 7 to 8, and it says, and already then there is a failure with you, that you have lawsuits among you. Why not rather be wronged? Why not rather be cheated? But you yourselves do wrong and cheat, and that you do to your brothers. Do you not know that the unrighteous shall not inherit the reign of Yahushua? Do not be deceived, neither those who whore. Where am I? No. 1 Corinthians 5, sorry, I'm in 6. 1 Corinthians 5, maybe I had to read that. 1 Corinthians 5, verses 7 to 8, and it says, therefore, cleanse out the leaven. So let's read from verse 6. Your boasting is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the entire bunch? So you see, a little bit of sin, leaven is here compared to sin. So where he's speaking over here, he said, deliver us. Okay, let's just go and read it from the beginning. It is commonly reported that there is whoring among you, and such whoring as it is not even named among the nations, so as one to have his father's wife. And you have been puffed up, and did not rather mourn, so that he who has done this deed be removed from among you. For I indeed, as absent in body, but present in spirit, have already judged the one who did this, as though I were present, in the name of our Master Yahushua Messiah, when you are gathered together, and my spirit with the power of our Master Yahushua Messiah. Deliver such a one to Hasatan. Oh my goodness, you see, so when people continue to sin and they do not want to be able to repent and turn from the wicked ways, what does he say? Deliver such a one to Hasatan for destruction of the flesh, in order that his spirit be saved in the day of Yahuwah and the day of the Master Yahushua. Your boasting is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? So what he's saying, a little bit of sin that you're going to tolerate amongst the brethren. So if you just keep overlooking the sin of the people in your little sphere of influence, and if you keep allowing them to continue to sin, then that little bit of leaven is going to leaven the rest of them. Therefore cleanse out the old leaven, so that you are a new lump, as you are unleavened, for also Messiah our Pesach was slaughtered for us. So you see, Messiah became the Passover that was slaughtered for us. So then let us celebrate the festival, not with the old leaven, nor with the leaven of evil and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. So what is he saying now? It doesn't help you to just go and clean out all the leaven from your houses. So while we are cleaning out the leaven of our houses, which is what we were told to do, this order throughout your generations. So as we are trying to get rid of everything in our house that's got yeast in it, that includes Marmite people. As we remove the leaven from our houses, that which has leaven in it, we are not just to clean the leaven as an outward manifestation, but we are to be able to clean the leaven from our hearts. And that is why I say, this is a time of when we now in great introspection to be able to ask the Father to seek our hearts and find and see if there be anything within us that is not in line and in order with Him. And if there is anything that is there that He needs to remove, any sin that we have, remember there's sin that is physical sin that we do, and then there's sin of the sins of the heart, where we are not forgiving people, where we are speaking up against people, whatever it may be. We need to be able to get rid of that leaven from our lives. So we thank Abba Father, because this is the teaching that the Father has brought, and I thank Him for it. And I pray that we will have a wonderful Passover, understanding that we speak again and say the Passover will start on the 8th. That night we eat the Passover meal, which we will have our roasted lamb, Make sure you don't make too much so that you don't waste it. Roasted lamb with bitter herbs, which is horseradish, which is what the bitter herbs are. The bitter herbs is known as the horseradish. You eat it with the horseradish and with your unleavened bread. For 7 days you are to have unleavened bread until the 15th of April. You have your unleavened bread, and then by that night of the unleavened bread, that night of the 15th, you end the feast. Remember the day of the 19th, starting on the eve of the 8th, not the 19th, the day of the 9th. You start it on the eve of the 8th. That day is a high holy Sabbath for us. And the last day, starting on the eve of the 14th of April, is a high holy Sabbath until the end of the 15th. Until that night is a high holy Sabbath. And then, Abba willing, if he wills, which I don't know if he's going to will, that we will then have lockdown until the 16th, the night of the 16th, and then we will then be let out if that happen, which I don't see that happening. So anyway, may you all have a wonderful Passover now from the teachings that I sent out, where you to understand why this is a real Passover. This is a real Passover because Yeshua would have died on a Wednesday, resurrected on a Saturday. At the close of Shabbat, he would have resurrected. And this is why the Father is wanting to raise up a first fruits kind of a people that are going to be his remnant to be able to do the greatest exploits upon the earth. So may Abba bless you all. Shalom, shalom.